Growing up in a small town, you tend to notice things people in my village kept to themselves. But everyone still knew each other's business. Our street was quiet-lined, with old houses and tall trees that whispered in the wind. My family lived in a small house with a white picket fence. But our neighbor's house was different, bigger, newer, and always spotless. It looked out of place. The owner of that house, Mr. Collins, was a wealthy man who lived there with his wife, Mrs. Collins, and their 2-year-old daughter, Stacy. Mr. Collins was an odd man. He didn't speak much and kept to himself. But what stood out the most was his obsession with his car. He owned a sleek black sports car, the kind you only see in magazines. Every weekend, without fail, he would be outside polishing and cleaning it as if it were made of gold. He would spend hours on that car making sure every inch was perfect. Sometimes, I would watch him from my window wondering why a car could mean so much to someone. Mrs. Collins was the complete opposite of her husband. She was always kind and friendly, often waving at me when she passed by. Sometimes, she would even stop to chat, asking about school or offering me some of the cookies. She baked. Stacy was a happy little girl, always giggling and playing in their yard. The sight of them together was comforting, a rare bit of warmth in our otherwise quiet neighborhood. But then one day everything changed. Mrs. Collins and Stacy disappeared. It was like they vanished into thin air. I remember the day the police came to our door asking if we had seen Mrs. Collins or Stacy. They said Mr. Collins reported them missing, claiming his wife had left him and taken their daughter with her. My parents were shocked, but there wasn't much we could tell. The police, we hadn't seen anything unusual, and like everyone else, we just assumed Mrs. Collins had left on her own weeks past, then months. And there was no sign of them. The whole town buzzed with rumors, each one wilder than the last. Some said Mrs. Collins ran away with another man, while others whispered about something far darker. I tried to push it out of my mind, but I could unshake the feeling that something was unright every time I saw Mr. Collins polishing his car. A chill ran down my spine. It felt wrong, like he was trying to distract himself from something horrible one day a few months after Mrs. Collins and Stacy had disappeared. Something strange happened. My dad was in the garage fixing up his old truck when he noticed something odd in Mr. Collins' garage. The door was slightly open, and inside, barely visible, was Mrs. Collins' white Jeep. It was covered in dust like it hadn't been touched in months. My dad called my mom and me over to see, and we all stood there staring at it, in shock if Mrs. Collins had run away. Why would her car still be here? A few days later, we noticed the Jeep was gone. Mr. Collins had sold it, or at least that's what we guessed he did. Didn't say anything to us. But the way he started acting was even stranger. He stopped going outside as much, and when he did, he seemed nervous. Constantly. Looking over his shoulder like he was being watched, the once spotless car now had a layer of dirt on it, and his yard, which used to be immaculate, was beginning to look neglected. Then one night, something happened that I'll never forget. My parents and I were having dinner when we heard a loud crash from Mr. Collins' house. My dad grabbed a flashlight and told us to stay inside. As he went to check it out from the window, I watched him walk across the yard and knock on Mr. Collins' door. It took a long time for Mr. Collins to answer. When he did, he looked pale, almost sick. My dad asked if everything was okay, but Mr. Collins just nodded and said he had dropped something. My dad came back inside, but he looked unsettled. He told us he had seen something strange when Mr. Collins opened the door in the dim light of the hallway. He saw a pot of some kind of liquid on the stove, and next to it a gun on the kitchen counter. He could not explain it, but something about the scene had disturbed him deeply after that night. Things seemed to spiral out of control. Mr. Collins became even more reclusive, and the whispers around town grew louder. Some people believed he had done something terrible to his wife and daughter, but there was no evidence. No proof, just suspicion and fear. Started having nightmares about it, about what could have happened behind those closed doors. The thought that something terrible might have taken place so close to home was terrifying. Years have passed since then, and I've grown up, moved away, and tried to leave those memories behind, but now and then I think about Mrs. Collins and Stacy. I wonder what happened to them, where they are now. And if they ever found safety, ILL. Never forget the sight of that white Jeep in the garage, the look on Mr. Collins' face when my dad knocked on his door, or the fear that gripped our town in the months that followed. Sometimes late at night when the world is quiet, I still feel that chill running down my spine. ILL. Never know for sure, but I feared the worst, and I hope, wherever they are, that Mrs. Collins and Stacy are safe, far away from the man who spent so much time polishing his car. I had been delivering food for a few months now, driving around the city and getting to know every corner of it most nights. were routine, pick up the order, follow the GPS, drop it off, and move on to the next one. But this night was different. It was late, maybe past midnight, and I had just received an order from a part of town. I did unrecognize the GPS led me away from the familiar roads and into a neighborhood I had never seen before. The houses were spaced far apart, and the streets seemed to twist and turn in ways that didn't make sense. Each corner I turned seemed to take me deeper into the maze of narrow roads and dark alleys. The street lights were few and far between, casting long, eerie shadows that made the entire area feel off. The further I drove, the more I felt like something was wrong. The roads didn't seem to match up with the map on my phone. I would make a turn, and suddenly the GPS would tell me to turn back, as if the streets were changing. Well, I drove, my hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, a sense of unease growing in the pit of my stomach. I knew I had to deliver the order. That was the job finally, after what felt like an eternity. The GPS announced that I had arrived. I slowed the car and looked at the house. It stood at the end of a cul-de-sac, a tall, narrow building with peeling paint and broken windows. The lawn was overgrown, the grass reaching up to my knees, and there was no sign of life. It looked abandoned. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the gear shift, ready to put the car in reverse and get out of there. But then I thought about the order, about the customer waiting for their food. Maybe it was just an old house and someone still lived there. Maybe they were just too busy or too tired to fix it up. I tried to shake off the unease that clung to me like a cold fog. I got out of the car, taking the bag of food with me. The air was thick and heavy, almost suffocating. As I walked toward the house, the gravel crunched under my feet. The only sound in the silent night, the closer the more I felt like I was being watched. My skin prickled with the sensation of a chill running down my spine. When I reached the porch, I noticed the front door was slightly ajar. It creaked open with the slightest push, revealing a dark hallway that stretched into the unknown. I could barely see a few feet inside the darkness, swallowing everything beyond that. "Hello!" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. There was no answer. Just the echo of my voice bouncing back at me from the empty hall. Something deep inside me screamed to leave, to drop the food and run back to the car. But I took another step forward, peering into the darkness. When I heard it, a faint rustling sound like leaves being dragged across the ground, I turned to look back at the street, and when I saw them, figures emerged from the shadows, stepping out from between the houses and around the corners. They moved silently, almost like they were gliding across the ground. My heart started pounding in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears as they got closer. The first one stepped into the dim light of the porch, and I could see it. It was a person, but their face was hidden behind a blank white mask. The mask had no features, just smooth, cold porcelain. The others followed, all wearing the same eerie, expressionless masks. They surrounded me, their presence pressing in on me from all sides. I tried to back away, but I was trapped against the porch railing. My breath came in quick, shallow gasps, my mind racing for a way out. One of them reached out, and I flinched, dropping the bag of food to the ground. Their hands were cold as ice as they grabbed me, pulling me toward the house. I struggled, trying to break free, but they were too strong the more I fought. The tighter their grip became. They didn't say a word, didn't make a sound as they dragged me inside. The door slammed shut behind us, plunging me into darkness. I was blind, my other senses taking over. I could hear their footsteps around me, soft but purposeful. I could feel their cold hands on me, searching through my pockets, taking my wallet, my phone, and my keys. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but the sound died in my throat. It was as if the darkness had swallowed my voice. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what was happening, but nothing made sense. All I could feel was the overwhelming dread, the terror that gripped me as they continued to strip me of everything I had. Finally, they let go of me, and I collapsed to the floor, trembling. I could hear their footsteps fading away, the creak of the door opening and closing again. And they were gone, leaving me alone in the pitch-black house. I stayed there for what felt like hours, too scared to move my mind, replayed the events over and over, trying to understand, but there was no understanding. It was like I had stepped into another world, a place where the rules didn't apply, where nothing made sense. Eventually, I forced myself to stand on my legs. Shaking beneath me, I found the door, pushed it open, and stumbled out into the night. The street was empty, no sign of the masked figures, no sign of anyone. My car was still there, untouched, as if nothing had happened. I had been robbed not just of my belongings, but of something more. My sense of safety, my trust in the world around me. I drove away from that house as fast as I could, the streets still twisting and turning, leading me in circles, until I finally found my way out. When I reached the main road, I did unlook back. I just kept driving, trying to escape the memory of those blank masks, of the cold hands that had pulled me into the darkness. but I knew no matter how far I drove, I would never truly escape the fear. It would always be there lurking just out of sight, waiting to drag me back into that twisting endless nightmare. Before we get into the next story, if you come for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share these stories with your friends and family. Thanks to hospital, was quiet at night, almost too quiet. I was unorderly, and my shift always seemed to drag on forever. The endless white walls, the soft hum of the fluorescent lights, and the distant beeps from machines made the place feel eerie. When the sun went down, the only real escape was the basement office, a small, dimly lit room where I spent most of my nights. When things were slow, the office was right next to the morgue, a place I tried not to think about too much. It was around midnight, maybe a little after, and I was sitting in the office with another orderly. We weren't doing much, just passing the time with idle conversation, and the occasional glance at the clock waiting for our shifts to end. The air was thick with the scent of disinfectant, the kind that clings to your clothes and fills your lungs. The only sound was the faint buzzing of the overhead light and the distant rumble of the air conditioning. Suddenly, I heard footsteps in the hallway. They were slow and deliberate. Not like the rushed steps of a doctor or a nurse. The sound caught both of our attention, and we turned to look at the open doorway. A man was passing by, his eyes flicking toward us as he walked. There was something off about the way he looked at us. Something shifty and unsettling. He didn't say anything, just kept walking, but I felt a strange chill creep up my spine. A few moments later, the man came back this time. He stopped at the doorway and looked at us. He had a pale, almost sickly complexion, and his eyes were wide as if he had even slept in days. His clothes were neat, but outdated, like something out of an old movie. He didn't seem like he belonged there, like he was out of place in the sterile modern hospital. "Do you have access to the morgue?" he asked, his voice low and raspy. I exchanged a glance with the other orderly. We both assumed he was doing a pickup for a funeral home. It was entirely unusual, though the time of night made it strange. "Yes," I said, cautiously, wondering what he was doing. "Here." So late, the man's expression did unchange, but there was a glint in his eyes that made me uneasy. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something about him just wasn't it. Right? I expected him to mention a name or give some sort of explanation, but he didn't. Instead, he just stood there staring at us with that unsettling look. Then he said something that made my heart skip a beat. I'll pay you to let me in, just for an hour. I need to be alone with the bodies." The words hung in the air, like a bad smell. And I felt the wave of nausea wash over me, the other orderly. And I exchanged another look, this one filled with disbelief and unease. The man didn't seem to notice our discomfort. His gaze was fixed, almost desperate, like he was waiting for us to say yes. I could feel the tension in the room thick and suffocating. My mind raced as I tried to process what he was asking. Who would want to be alone in the morgue at this time of night, and why the whole situation felt wrong, like a scene from a nightmare? "We co?" "Undo that," I said, my voice sounding more confident than I felt it. Again. "Hospital policy." The man's expression darkened, and for a moment I thought he might argue or try to persuade us. But then, he seemed to realize that we were ungoing to budge. His eyes narrowed and he clenched his jaw, the muscles in his face twitching slightly. He didn't say anything, just stared at us with a look that made my skin crawl. Finally, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. The other orderly and I sat there in stunned silence. The gravity of what had just happened slowly sinking in my heart was pounding, and I could unshake the feeling that we had narrowly avoided. "Something terrible, we should tell security," I said after a few moments. The other orderly nodded, and we quickly made our way upstairs to the security office. The hospital felt even more ominous as we walked through the empty halls, the shadows seeming to stretch and grow. In the dim light, when we reached the security office, we found the guard on duty and explained what had happened. As soon as we described the man, the guard's expression changed. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with recognition. "Did he say anything about wanting to be alone in the morgue?" the guard asked, his voice tense. "Yes," I replied, the unease in my stomach deepening. The guard let out a heavy sigh and shook his head. "He has tried this before. We've had a few run-ins with him over the past couple of months. He always disappears before we can catch him. But we know he is up to something. The man had done this before. What could he possibly want with the bodies in the morgue?" My mind conjured up all sorts of disturbing possibilities. None of them comforting. The guard assured us that they would increase their patrols and keep an eye out for the man. But the whole experience left me shaken as I made my way back to the basement office. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had come dangerously close to something dark and twisted. The hospital didn't feel safe anymore, not like it ever really had. But now, it was different. Now, it felt like a place where the shadows hid secrets too terrible to imagine for the rest of my shift. I couldn't stop thinking about the man, his pale face, his desperate eyes, the way he had asked to be left. Alone with the dead, it all played over and over in my mind like a broken record. Even after my shift ended. And I went home. The unease lingered like a shadow that refused to leave. I never saw the man again. But the memory of that night stayed with me every time. I walked past the morgue. I felt that same chill, the one that reminded me of how close we had come to letting something monstrous slip through our fingers in 2019. When I was 13 years old, my dad took me hunting in the Pine Barrens. We had been there before. But this time it felt different. It was darker and the trees seemed closer together, like they were trying to trap us. The air was heavy, filled with the smell of damp leaves and pine needles. It was so quiet that even the wind barely made a sound. We arrived just before sunset, setting up near the edge of the forest. My dad always told me the best time to hunt was at night when the animals were more active. I wasn't scared. I had been hunting with my dad before, and I trusted him, but as the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness swallowed the trees, I began to feel uneasy. The shadows stretched longer, turning the forest into a maze of dark shapes. We walked deeper into the woods, our boots crunching. Softly on the leaves, my dad had his rifle, and I carried a smaller one he had given me for my birthday. I held it close to my chest, feeling the cool metal against my palms. The deeper we went, the thicker the trees grew, blocking out the moonlight. Soon, the only light came from our flashlights now. And then we would stop listening for any sign of movement. My dad was good at tracking animals, and he would often crouch down to inspect the ground. But that night we didn't hear or see anything. No rustling leaves, no snapping twigs. It was like the forest had gone completely still after an hour of walking. I started to feel tired, my legs ached, and I wanted to rest. My dad noticed and suggested we sit down for a bit. We found a small clearing and sat on a fallen log. The forest was so quiet that I could hear my heartbeats. My dad whispered something about waiting for the right moment, but I barely heard him. I was too focused on the darkness around us. Suddenly there was a sound. It was not the usual rustling of leaves or the snapping of a twig. It was a low growl, deep and guttural, like something big was watching us. My heart sped up and I looked at my dad. He was staring straight ahead, his face pale. He slowly reached for his rifle, motioning for me to do the same. The growl came again. This time closer, it echoed through the trees, making the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I gripped my rifle tighter, my hands shaking. My dad stood up slowly, his eyes scanning the trees. He didn't say a word, but I could see the fear in his eyes. Whatever was out there, it was on something we had ever encountered before. Then, from the shadows, a figure appeared. It was tall, much taller than any animal I had seen before. Its body was hunched over, and its eyes glowed faintly in the dark. It had the shape of a wolf, but much larger, almost like it did unbelong in this world. The growling grew louder, more aggressive. The creature's breath was visible in the cold night air, and I could see its sharp teeth glinting in the faint light of our flashlights. My dad whispered for me to stay still, but my legs felt like they were going to give out. I did unmove, frozen in place as the creature slowly stepped closer. Its growl turned into a snarl, its yellow eyes locked on us. My dad raised his rifle, aiming it at the creature, but he didn't shoot. It was like we both knew that shooting would unhelp us. The creature circled us, moving through the shadows every time. I thought it was gone. It would appear again, its glowing eyes watching us from the dark. I could barely breathe, my chest tight with fear. We were trapped, surrounded by darkness in this terrifying creature. The creature let out a loud, bone-chilling howl, so loud that it seemed to shake the trees around us. My dad grabbed my arm, pulling me. My feet, without thinking, I ran. I could hear my dad running behind me, and the creature's growls echoed through the forest. The trees blurred as we sprinted through the underbrush. Branches scratching in my arms and face. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they were going to collapse. But I didn't stop. We ran deeper into the forest, not caring which direction we were going. All I knew was that I had to get away from that creature, but the more we ran, the more lost we became. The familiar trails had disappeared in every direction, looked the same, just endless dark trees and shadows. After what felt like hours, we stopped to catch our breath. My heart pounded in my chest and my legs shook from exhaustion. My dad leaned against a tree, his face pale and sweaty. The growling had stopped, but the silence that followed was even more terrifying. We need to keep moving, my dad said, his voice barely a whisper. But I didn't know where to go. We were lost in the Pine Barrens, and that creature was still out. They're watching us. We wandered through the forest for what seemed like hours, trying to find our way back to the truck. Every noise made me jump. Every shadow looked like the creature. My flashlight was starting to die, its beam growing weaker. The thought of being stuck in the forest in complete darkness terrified me. Just when I thought we would never find our way out, we stumbled upon a familiar path. It was narrow and overgrown, But I recognized it from earlier. My dad let out a sigh of relief, and we followed the path back to the truck. When we finally reached it, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I climbed into the passenger seat, my hands still shaking. My dad started the engine and we drove away. The dark trees of the pine barrens fading into the distance. We didn't speak on the ride home. The encounter with that creature was something neither of us could explain, and I didn't want to think about it anymore. But as I looked out the window, I could unshake the feeling that we were alone in the forest that night. We made it out unharmed. But I knew one thing for sure. I would never go hunting in the Pine Barrens again. I've been working the night shift at this gas station for about a year now. The place sits on the edge of town far enough. A way that we do want to get too much traffic during the late hours. It is a quiet job most of the time. I just sit behind the counter, ring up the occasional customer, and watch the clock slowly crawl towards morning the night. This all happened was no different from the others. It was around 2:30 a.m. and I was getting ready for the end of my shift. The store was empty. As it usually is at this time, the lights outside cast long shadows across the parking lot, and the only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning inside the store. I had been counting the cash from the register, making sure everything was in order. My manager always told me to be careful, especially at night. You never know who might come through that door. She'd say I didn't think much of it, then I thought I had everything under control. I had just finished counting the last of the bills when the front door suddenly slammed open. The sound was so loud I nearly jumped out of my seat before one could even register. What was happening? A man stormed inside. He looked rough, dirty clothes, wild eyes, and he smelled like he had showered in days. He didn't say anything. His eyes were locked on the cash I was holding. In my hand, my body froze for a second and everything seemed to slow down. I knew I should have done something, but I just stood there without warning. He lunged at me, grabbing the cash from my hands. It all happened so fast. 1 second I had the money in my hands, the next it was gone. And the man was already halfway to the door. That's when my instincts finally kicked in. I do not know what came over me, but I was going to let him get away with it. I bolted from behind the counter and ran after him, shouting for him to stop. The adrenaline pumping through my veins drowned out any fear. I might have felt the guy was not moving too fast. He stumbled as he reached the parking lot, his movements unsteady. I figured he had to be on something drugs. Maybe I could see the money sticking out of his jacket pocket as he tried to make his escape. Stop right there. He turned around, panic in his eyes. He tried to run faster, but his body was uncooperating. I closed the gap between us, and without thinking, I grabbed him by the arm. He struggled trying to shake me off, but I held on. We wrestled for a moment before he broke free and started running again, but he wasn't getting far. My heart was racing, but I wasn't about to give up. I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking. As I explained the situation to the operator, I told them where I was describing the man and what had just happened. They told me officers were on their way. I kept following him, keeping a safe distance. Now, I didn't want to corner him. Who knows what a desperate man might do. He didn't seem to notice that I was still trailing him. He was more focused on running, though. It was clear he was going to get far. His pace was slowing, and he kept looking over his shoulder after what felt like hours, though it was probably only a few minutes. I heard the distant sound of police sirens. The man heard it too. He stopped dead in his tracks, his whole body tensing up. I stayed back, not wanting to spook him any further. Within moments, the police cars pulled into the lot, their lights flashing too. Officers got out, guns drawn, ordering the man to get on the ground. He hesitated for a moment, but he knew it was over. Slowly, he dropped to his knees and put his hands behind his head. The officers moved in, cuffing him and pulling him to his feet. One of them came over to me, asking me for details. I explained everything, still trying to catch my breath. My hands were trembling, but I tried to stay calm. As I recounted what happened, they searched the man and found the cash still stuffed in his jacket. One of the officers told me that the man was homeless and likely on drugs, which explained his erratic behavior. He had probably been desperate, looking for anything he could get his hands on. I watched as they led him to the back of the squad car, his head hanging low. A part of me felt sorry for him, living on the streets, addicted to something that was ruining his life. But at the same time, I was relieved that the whole ordeal was over. The officers thanked me for my quick response, telling me I did the right thing by calling them. They said that chasing him was the safest option, but they understood why I did it. I nodded, still shaken by the whole thing. After the police left, I went back inside the gas station. The place felt different. Now, what was once just another quiet night on the job had turned into something I would unforget anytime soon. I sat behind the counter trying to calm my nerves, my hands still feeling shaky. I looked at the clock. My shift was almost over, but I was uncounting the minutes like I usually did. I just sat there staring at the front door, half expecting someone else to burst through the rest of the night. Was uneventful, but I could unshake the feeling of how close. I came to something worse. When my shift finally ended, I grabbed my things and left, locking the doors behind me as I walked to my car. I couldn't help but think about the man. Life had beaten him down, and in his desperation, he made a choice that landed him in the back of a police car. But as I drove home, I realized something. I was lucky. Things could have gone a lot worse that night. The road stretched out before us, dark and winding, as we drove through the forest. It was supposed to be a weekend of fun, just me, Devin, and our friends, Bethany and Seth, heading out for a camping trip. College semester had been brutal, and we all needed a break. The thought of sleeping under the stars, roasting marshmallows, and telling ghost stories by the fire made us all excited. But something about that night felt different. The trees seemed to loom closer to the road, their branches reaching out like twisted fingers. The moonlight barely pierced through the thick canopy above, casting strange shadows that danced across the pavement. I tried to shake off the unease that settled in the pit of my stomach, convincing myself it was just the excitement of the trip. We were laughing, the radio playing our favorite songs, when suddenly a sharp turn came out of nowhere. Devin, who was driving, tried to swerve, but the car skidded on the wet road. The world spun around us as the tires screeched, and the car went off the road, crashing into the trees. I heard Bethany scream, and then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, we were all standing outside. The car, it was crumpled against a tree, the front smashed in, steam rising from the engine. I felt strange, like everything was muffled. Distant Bethany stood next to me, her face pale, and Seth was on the other side, staring at the wreckage. "Is everyone okay?" I asked, my voice sounding oddly flat. Bethany nodded slowly, but she didn't look at me. Seth was silent, his eyes fixed on the car. I turned to see what he was staring at. And that is when my heart dropped. Inside the car, still strapped into our seats, were our bodies. I blinked, unable to process what I was seeing there. I was slumped over in the passenger seat, a trickle of blood running down my forehead. Devin was still gripping the steering wheel, his face twisted in pain. Bethany and Seth were in the back, their faces ashen weary. Outside the car, Bethany whispered, finally looking at me. Her eyes were wide with fear. But we still in there. I didn't know what to think. It felt like a nightmare, but everything was so vivid, so real. I reached out to touch the car, but my hand passed right through the metal. Panic started to build in my chest. "Are we dead?" Seth finally spoke, his voice trembling. I didn't want to answer. The thought was too horrifying, too impossible. But what else could explain what was happening? We were standing here outside, our bodies unable to touch anything, unable to feel anything. The forest around us seemed to grow darker, the trees closing in the air thick. Was something I could undescribe. It felt like we were being watched, like something was waiting for us in the shadows. I tried to move to walk away from the car, but my feet felt heavy, as if something was pulling me back. "We have to get out of here," I said, trying to sound brave, but my voice cracked. Maybe. There is a way to fix this." But where could we go? We were in the middle of the woods, far from any town or help. The only thing that seemed real was the car and the broken bodies inside. Time passed in a blur. I do not know how long we stood there, staring at ourselves, trapped in that sinking vehicle. The night seemed endless, the darkness pressing in from all sides, every sound in the forest. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a branch made my heart race. It felt like the trees themselves were whispering, mocking us, telling us that we didn't belong in this world anymore. At some point, I started to feel dizzy, like I was being pulled into a deep, dark hole. My vision blurred and the sounds around me faded. I could hear Bethany crying and could see Seth's terrified face, but it all seemed far away. Then everything went black again when I opened my eyes. I was in a hospital bed. The bright lights above me stung my eyes, and the beeping of machines filled the room. I turned my head slowly, feeling groggy, like I was waking up from a long, terrible dream. Devin was in the bed next to me, his eyes half open, and I could see Bethany and Seth in the room as well. All of us hooked up 2 monitors, bandages covering our wounds. We were alive, I whispered, not quite believing it. A nurse came into the room, checking our vitals, smiling warmly. "You all had a nasty accident. But you were going to be okay," she said. "You've been unconscious for a couple of days, but you're out of danger now." I could hardly process her words. My mind was still reeling from what we had experienced. I looked at Bethany, who was staring back at me with wide eyes. Seth was silent, his face pale, but there was relief in his expression. It had felt so real, the crash. Our bodies trapped in that sinking car, the fear that we were ghosts. But now, lying in this hospital bed, I was unsure what to believe. Had it all been a dream, some kind of shared nightmare brought on by the trauma of the crash? As the nurse continued to check on us, I felt a shiver run down my spine. It didn't feel like a nightmare. Not entirely the memory of that dark forest, the sinking feeling, of being trapped outside my own body lingered in my mind, too vivid to ignore, but as I looked at my friends safe and alive, I tried to push the thoughts away. We were okay. We had survived, the nightmare was over after a long, exhausting shift as a pizza delivery driver. During a heat wave, all I wanted was to finish my last delivery and head home. My shirt was sticking to my back, my hair was damp with sweat, and my legs felt like they could give out at any moment. The sun had long set, but the heat still lingered thick and oppressive. Like a blanket you could unkick off. My throat was dry and my mouth tasted like cardboard from too many hours without water, but the worst part, I desperately needed to use the bathroom. I checked the address one more time. As I pulled up to the house, the place was dark with no lights on inside or outside. The house looked like it had been lived in 4 years. Windows, dear dirty paint peeling, and the front lawn overgrown. I parked my car and grabbed the pizza, bulks hoping this would be quick, but something about the house made me uneasy. It felt abandoned, like a place forgotten by time, the kind of place where shadows seemed to move on their own. I walked up to the front door and the silence was deafening. No crickets, no distant traffic, not even the rustle of leaves in the breeze. I rang the doorbell, but no one answered. I rang again, waiting, feeling the sweat drip down my neck. Still nothing. I pulled out my phone and called the number on the order. After a few rings, a woman's voice answered, out of breath and apologetic. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I am on my way. Please, just wait a few minutes." Her voice was shaky, like she was trying to hide something or someone. I could unshake the feeling that something was off, but I nodded. Even though she could unsee me, "Okay," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. I'll wait, but the need to relieve myself was growing unbearable. I gleed around, hoping to find some sign of life. A neighbor, maybe. Even a stray cat, anything that would make this place feel less creepy. But the street was empty. It was just me in this old eerie house. I could unwait any longer. There was a large bush near the front of the house, thick with leaves. It was dark enough to give me some privacy. So I walked over, glancing around one last time before unzipping my pants. Relief washed over me as I let go, the tension in my body finally easing. But then something moved, a rustle in the bushes. Right in front of me, my heart skipped a beat, and I stumbled back, almost falling over as I zipped up my pants. In the dim light, I saw a figure, someone crouched low in the bush, their face hidden in shadows. I had just peed on a man. The man suddenly bolted out of the bush, sprinting away. Before I could even process what had just happened, he did. On look back, just ran like his life depended on it, disappearing. Into the darkness of the night, I stood there, frozen, my heart hammering in my chest, my mind raced with 1,000 questions. Who was he? What was he doing? Hiding in that bush, and why did he run? I looked down and saw something glinting in the faint light, a bag half hidden in the leaves. I reached down, hands shaken, and pulled it out. It was a small, worn backpack, and when I opened it, my stomach dropped. Inside was a roll of duct tape, a knife with a serrated edge, and a length of rope. My breath caught in my throat. This was no ordinary bag. This was something a person would carry if they had bad intentions. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. This man, the one hiding in the bushes, was just some vagrant or a thief. He was planning something terrible, and I had interrupted in my hands. Shook as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The operator answered quickly, and I tried to keep my voice steady as I explained what had happened. I told them about the man, the bag, the woman who was supposed to be coming to the house. They assured me help was on the way, but it felt like an eternity. Before I heard the distant wail of sirens, I paced the front yard, eyes darting from shadow to shadow, expecting the man to return at any moment. Then I saw her, a woman walking quickly down the street, looking over her shoulder. Every few seconds, she was the one who had called the customer. She was pale, her eyes wide with fear. And when she saw me, she broke into a run. "You have to help me," she said, her voice trembling as she reached me. "He est after me. My XTS dangerous." I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed her arm and pulled her towards my car. "Get in," I said, trying to sound calm. Even though my heart was racing, we'll wait for the police. Here she nodded, tears streaming down her face as she climbed into the passenger seat. I locked the doors, my eyes scanning the dark street, waiting for any sign of movement. Minutes felt like hours, but finally, the flashing lights of police cars filled the street. Officers poured out, and I waved them over, explaining everything as quick, as I couldn't. They moved swiftly, searching the area. But the man was long gone. The only thing left behind was the bag. I had found the woman was safe, and they took her statement, reassuring her that they would do everything they could to find her ex. I watched as she was led to one of the police cars, her face a mix of relief and lingering fear. As for me, I drove home that night, and the image of that man in the bushes burned into my mind. I couldn't stop thinking about what could have happened if I had UNT been there. And if I had UNT needed to relieve myself at that exact moment, it was UNT just luck deep down. I knew I had been meant to be there, and the thought of how close that woman came to something terrible left me deeply shaken. Never forget that night, the way the shadows seemed to move, the oppressive heat pressing down on me, and the feeling of cold fear creeping up my spine. A few years ago, my best friend Kevin and I made a plan to explore an old abandoned house on the edge of our town. We had heard many stories about it being haunted, but we didn't believe them. We thought it would be fun, something thrilling to do on a boring weekend. Little did we know that decision would change how we saw things forever. The house was on a hill, far from any other buildings. It looked ancient, with cracked walls and broken windows. The roof had caved in at some spots, and vines covered most of the house, making it look like it was being swallowed. But nature, as we approached, I felt an uneasy feeling in my chest. Kevin, always the brave one, walked ahead confidently. "We'll just go in, take a look around and leave," Kevin said, trying to sound calm. I nodded, though a strange sense of dread was creeping up on me. The air around the house felt heavier and colder, like something was wrong. I shook off the feeling and followed Kevin through the broken gate. The front door was hanging off its hinges, creaking as we pushed. It opened inside. The house was dark and smelled of dust and decay. The floor was covered in dirt, and old furniture lay scattered, broken and forgotten. The silence inside was suffocating, broken only by the faint sounds of the wind blowing through the cracks in the walls. Kevin started walking around, looking at the old furniture and the peeling wallpaper. I stayed close behind him, my eyes scanning every corner of the room. Something didn't feel right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. As we moved deeper into the house, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. My heart pounded in my chest, and I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. Kevin, on the other hand, was still acting like nothing was wrong. We reached a narrow staircase that led up to the second floor. Kevin turned to me with a grin. "Let us check upstairs," he said. I hesitated. "Maybe we should just look around down here," I suggested, trying to keep my voice steady. But Kevin was already climbing the stairs, the old wood creaking under his weight. I sighed and followed him, gripping the railing tightly. The second floor was even darker than the first. The windows were either boarded up or too dirty to let in any light. As we walked down the hallway, I noticed something strange. The air up here was colder, and there was a foul smell like something rotten. I wanted to tell Kevin that we should leave, but before I could say anything, we heard a low, deep growl echoed through the hallway. Kevin froze, and I felt my blood turn to ice. The sound was coming from behind a door at the end of the hall. It was yet an animal growl. It was something much more sinister. "We need to leave," I whispered, my voice shaking. But Kevin, stubborn as ever, started walking toward the door. "It is probably just the wind or something," he said. Though I could hear the uncertainty in his voice as he reached for the door, the growling grew louder, more menacing. My heart was racing, and every instinct in me screamed to run, but my feet felt glued to the floor. Kevin slowly pushed the door open, and what we saw inside made my stomach churn. The room was dark, but in the corner we could see a shadow, a figure that was unquite human. It was hunched over, and its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. The growling stopped, and for a moment there was complete silence. Then the figure spoke in a voice that made my skin crawl. "Leave or never leave again." The words hung in the air like a curse. Kevin and I did not wait to see what would happen next. Without a second thought, we turned and bolted down the hallway. The house seemed to come alive around us, the walls groaning and the floor creaking. As if something was chasing us, we stumbled down the stairs, barely keeping our balance, and sprinted for the front door. The air around us felt thick, like it was trying to pull us back, but we did unstop. We ran out of the house, through the broken gate, and didn't look back until we were far enough away to catch our breath. When we finally stopped, both of us were gasping for air, our hearts pounding in our chests. We stood there in the empty field, staring at the house in the distance. It looked the same as before, quiet and still, but we knew better. Now, we never talked about that day again, but the memory of it stayed with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had escaped something dangerous, something that did unwant us there. The words of the figure echoed in my mind. "Leave or never leave again." To this day, I do unknow what we encountered in that house, but one thing was certain. We had come too close to something beyond our understanding. Something dark and twisted lived in that house, and it had made sure we knew it from that day on. I avoided that hill, that house, whatever was in there. I didn't want to find out we were lucky to escape, but not everyone might be as fortunate. I never forgot the warning, "Leave or never leave again."